Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to ask Christian to open us with a moment of meditation in his way, and then I'll come back and introduce the program.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and to see all your faces and get to know you. So I wanted to offer this prayer for us today. Why don't we all take a deep breath in and out. Spirit of life and love, we gather today in this group to do the work of creating beloved community. We know that these are hard, challenging times for so many, both here and all over the world, and especially for the most vulnerable among us. We know that many of us here and all over the world are stretched thin too, financially, emotionally, physically, mentally. And so today, as we prepare to do this work and then to go out into the world to do more of it, we ask for strength. Strength to do work that needs to be done even when it's hard. And we ask for patience and kindness and all the other things that we might need, even if we're not feeling those ways at this particular moment. Let us be beacons for others to see and follow. And so may our work be blessed. May our gathering be a blessing. Amen.
Thank you, Christian. We're very happy today to have a special guest, Sarah. Many of us know Sarah. When we discussed, the VIC steering committee came together, and today's focus is to deal with pandemic transitions. And so what we would like to hear from Sarah is how the county responded and what are some of the things in maybe issues that they ran into, and also to help us look at what are some of the things that the church can do and other organizations in the county to help make sure we meet the needs of our neighbors. For those of you who don't know Sarah, she is currently the Deputy Director for Neighborhood and Community Services. She served in a number of positions here in Fairfax County's Human Services Agency throughout her 22 years with the county. As a Deputy Director, she supports the work of the Regional Services Centers, Operations Divisions, the Access to Community Resources, and Program Divisions. I think I missed something. The majority of her career with the county has been spent either working in or supporting county efforts in Region 1. So she's not new to us. We know Sarah. She's been with us before. She used to attend VIC regularly when she was here with us. And she's always been enjoyed and been impressed with the amazing collaborative work that VIC does. So Sarah, it's in your hands.
Thank you very much, everyone. Great to see your faces. And I am hoping that I could use about 20 minutes to talk through a PowerPoint, if that's okay. And I know we need to get to our conversation, which is the truly rich part of this. So John, if you could start the PowerPoint, that would be great. As my colleague is pulling up the PowerPoint, great. I just want to note that what I'm doing here is I'm really highlighting some of the efforts that have happened throughout the county. But as you know, there has been significant work done by all of you, our community providers, and the county, and of course, Fairfax County Public Schools, to respond in a way that has been unprecedented and has been really learning situation and guide. And as was noted in our time of meditation, I think we've all tried to show patience and tolerance, but we also have been able to challenge each other. And that's what I'm hoping this conversation can be too, is that I can share some information about what has happened, but also have some conversations about what we need to do moving forward. Next slide. Great. The question that you all were asking about addressing human services needs exacerbated by the pandemic is where I wanted to start. I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about eviction prevention and intervention efforts that we're doing. But I wanted to put this in context first. And please know that these are, like I said, just highlights of what has been happening. And if at any point you all would like us to go into more depth about some of these examples, we'd be glad to come back and give more depth and give more examples if you'd like. So a couple of highlights that I'd like to share is that throughout the pandemic, particularly exacerbating, our most vulnerable communities have been most impacted, as you know, and so that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so we really, all of us have had to look at new ways to connect with residents and to deliver services. This is nothing new to you all. You all are doing it as well in your houses of worship and your community organizations. But we moved to, as you know, including significant virtual programming, as well as not just virtual programming, because not all community residents have an ability to connect with us virtually. So there was still significant in-person programming, and that's increasing as the days are going on. Our senior centers have started opening back up. Youth programming is expanding. We also, I believe we've always had this commitment, but through the pandemic, we've needed to emphasize it even more, which is to do innovative and new ways to go into the community to serve residents where they are. I see my colleagues from United Community here. They, of course, have done an excellent job at always reminding us and having a vehicle to make sure that we're going to where community residents are, and then identifying and removing barriers to access for supports. And that's what I hope our conversation will get to. Program. Also, the partnerships to improve healthcare and basic needs for our most vulnerable residents. So many of you have been involved in informing and giving opportunities for COVID testing and vaccinations, particularly our equity clinics that the health department and other colleagues have done. You all have been instrumental in informing those decisions, but also having vehicles or having your houses of worship be vehicles to be able to get that done. We've done new and expanded food disbursement partnerships. So, you know, our food providers on the Route 1 corridor have been amazing. And that is, but there's also been new partnerships that have come out of this pandemic. People are serving residents in new and innovative ways, and those that have always been doing it are expanding their work every day. And an important role that I feel like I wanted to highlight here was that we also are spending a lot of time at coordinating efforts and increasing communication. And why I'm talking about that is because, as you know, our response is only as good as what's efficient and effective. And if we're all going in directions, it can make it more disconnected for our residents, which is never anything that we want. And it also cannot be maybe as effective as they're looking for. So coordination in terms of service providers and increased communication has been key for the pandemic response. Within Health and Human Services, I believe many of you participate in our community provider strategy team, and that has subcommittees that are working on topics such as food, rental assistance, transportation, etc. But coordination has to be key in a response like this. We also have been looking at data and appropriate responses to equity concerns and equity opportunities that we have to work differently with our community and to ensure that we're being inclusive and strategic in our response. You all and our community providers have been key in talking about what does the community need, how can the community have a seat at the table, what are we doing to ensure that we're being supportive, but also empowering, not just empowering, but also lifting up the assets that the community already has. And then lastly, investing in community providers and businesses has been a focus. The county has created 4 sets of grants. The RISE and Nonprofit Sustainability Grant happened last year. And this year, we've initiated the Pivot Grant, which was for small businesses, and the Active and Thriving Community Grants, which was for community-based organizations, daycare centers, or daycare providers, excuse me, and the like. And so those were launched and just recently closed. One highlight that I want to make sure I mention is that we've also developed some contracts for community outreach, both to landlords and tenants. We're expanding those here shortly, and I believe there's an opportunity for houses of worship to participate in supporting that effort. And also, we're going to be launching a food access program through the ARPA funding, the American Rescue Plan Act funding, which is an opportunity for houses of worship and community-based organizations to apply for funding for food access. So that can look like literally purchasing of food, innovative practices in food, as well as infrastructure needs by the nonprofits and houses of worship about things that they would not be able to purchase on their own, but perhaps this grant can help them with that. We have $3.5 million, and that is going to be launched in probably in the middle of the month. We're going to try to get that out as soon as possible. And then lastly, what I'd like to spend most of my time on today is to talk about eviction prevention and intervention efforts. Next slide, John. Okay, to familiarize everyone, I believe many of you know a lot of what happens when people are accessing basic needs in the county. However, I just wanted to make sure in case you didn't, what we're doing and specifically what we're doing to prevent evictions in the county. So we have 3 lanes that we utilize, or 3 opportunities that we utilize to support residents to ensure their housing is stable. The first one is if a resident requesting support, they go through our coordinated services planning social work call center. As you know, that is the 222 number. And that is when a resident is initiating help and needing support. And that is their way to be able to work with us. I'll go into a little bit more about that in a moment. The next is through the eviction prevention unit, and that's called EPI. That is something new we stood up since the pandemic, which is our way to, we actually are receiving information from the sheriff's office around court-involved residents who are facing eviction. And that's our way to proactively reach out to them to see if they're able to see if they are eligible, and we can facilitate rental assistance. So that's the other way that we're going to be working with residents. And then the third way, which is also new since the pandemic, is the landlord portal, where a landlord applies on behalf of the resident and works with the resident to be able to complete an application for housing stability. All of those 3 lanes are funneled through the coordinated services planning, as well as the other NCS units. And we partner with our community providers who have received different sources of funding. And that funding then is dispersed by the community provider to the landlord. And all of this is to ensure that the residents are retaining and are stable in their housing. And I'll go into more detail in a moment about each one of these. Next slide. Okay, so as we were preparing both this presentation as well as a presentation that we recently did to the board, we wanted to talk about the highlights of what's happening and how we're improving our processes since the pandemic, and how we're being nimble and how we're trying to adapt, because we've just been learning lessons from your feedback as well as from what our system is telling us. So the way my next 3 slides are structured is to talk about how we do it, but then also where are we going in the future. So the first lane, as I shared with you, is about CSP, when a resident is calling on their own behalf, and wanted to make sure that everyone knew that when someone calls us, they do complete a one-time assessment, which can take an average of 30 minutes, and that is an average. Why it's important to note that is there's a lot of myths out there about what it is that residents need to do and have to provide. The reason we have someone go through an assessment as opposed to just filling out an application is because we do want to assess them for all available funding sources, but we also want to be able to see how we can connect them to other needs that they might have and other supports. And the idea behind that is one story, one time, so that a resident doesn't have to call multiple places or tell their story multiple times. Now, what's important to note here, though, is that because of the urgency of funding, and because there are residents that may not want to do a full assessment, we are adapting, and it's in a work in progress. We're further adapting our assessment by reducing the length and prioritizing housing assistance eligibility screening to the front of the actual conversation and the process. So as we talk about at the end of the program, things that houses of worship can do and community organizations can do, I want to just note that a tenant assessment is optional. So if a resident says, I don't want to do all of that, I just want you to help me with housing assistance, and here's the information that I have for you, that is okay and that is possible. The other piece that's important to note is, and I'll get into wait times in a moment, but we have instituted a callback feature where residents do not have to wait on the line for a social worker. And once they're completing their application, or excuse me, completed their request, they are able to get the extension number for their social worker, and they do not have to go through and wait the next time they call. A couple other pieces that I might want to highlight here is that a new database will be implemented where we will have a tenant portal. So what's going to be great about that is that a tenant can kind of apply at any time of day and night, and residents can also choose if they still want to talk to a social worker. A tenant portal will still allow us to connect with residents on other needs, but it will be kind of a secondary aspect if they're so interested. And then lastly, we wanted to note that exploring innovative strategies to increase completion rates for tenant housing assistance. What that means is, and I'll get into this later on, is that there are process improvement efforts that need to be done with CSP, but also with landlords when they're submitting or not submitting all of their paperwork. And of course, tenants with not being able to submit or submitting all of their paperwork. And we have some lessons learned about what the best way is to potentially do that to support residents in getting all of that information to us so we can process their case. Wanted to note here that houses of worship and community providers have been the backbone to supporting residents' needs. And the way we've seen this, which Brenda asked me about, was, of course, you all have been encouraging people to call for assistance. You've been also providing direct assistance. And as well as was noted earlier, that the spiritual and non-material needs that you all are meeting is absolutely imperative to supporting the whole person and the whole community. So that's what we've been seeing and have just been so grateful for that role that you all play. Next slide. Okay, the next slide here is just about our eviction prevention and intervention work. I won't go too much into all of this because you will get my slides, but wanted to note that again, this is us reaching out to residents who are facing eviction. That we have coordinated, it's probably closer to about $1 million now of housing assistance through just that process. Overall, since the pandemic, resources are close to 47 million that have been dispersed, but just in this way, it's close to $1 million. And we haven't necessarily gotten the response from tenants to this initial contact as much as we want. And the reason why we say that is because tenants, once they're involved in the court system, they may not be answering their mail. They may be more hesitant to talk to anyone. And what we're really finding that's unfortunate is sometimes people are vacating their lease and moving on, and without kind of closing out their responsibility of rent. And what I want you all to know is that if a resident needs to leave their lease or vacate their lease, that could go with them in terms of the rental history. And we are able to pay and to support residents if they meet the criteria in back rent. So we don't want people to leave their like an outstanding bill. If possible, we will help them make sure they clean that up while they're in the county. If they've gone to another county to be able to find perhaps other kinds of housing arrangements, we're still able to talk to them about the housing they had here in Fairfax County. Next slide. And then wanted to note here, the landlord applications it's been going very well, except we do think we have seen some landlords up and down the corridor, as well as in other parts of the county, starting applications, but not necessarily completing them. So we have some strategies about wanting to fix that and to get that to be a higher response rate. And We're still assessing eligibility through the landlord portal. Resident involvement is mandatory. So we are not, it is not a landlord that's just applying on behalf of the resident and the resident doesn't participate in this. The resident and the landlord sign a document together, etc. And what we're trying to talk about here is that we are going to allocate additional funding to some community providers in an effort to increase landlord application completion rates. Next slide. Okay, this slide here it's a lot of words, I realize, but what's very important to note here, and some of you may have seen this before, is that on the left-hand side lists all of the funding sources that are being coordinated through CSP. So many of you have probably heard of ERA, or the Emergency Rental Assistance funding, and that's an amazing amount, close to $70 million coming into the county. But prior to that, there was CARES funding. There was also CARES 2.0 funding, which is allowable for mortgages and for people that may not meet the ERA funding. And we've had community development block grant money. And most importantly for you all is that we also have community-based organization funding outside of those county funded processes. And that's really important because that's close to $2 million that has been dispersed. So in the middle is how much money is available. The next row is our spending to date. And so what I'd like to highlight to you is our ERA funding, the ERA 1 it's called. We've spent $17.8 million, and that's been since June 2nd. And that is, so we are spending at a pretty good clip. The total here is 47 million. And I highlight that because that's the rental assistance and utility assistance that's been supporting residents, but we recognize that there's still a lot more to do and still a lot more to come. Next slide. Okay, quickly for emergency rental assistance, and this gets to what we'd like you all to help us with is there is specific eligibility criteria, and the federal government is trying to make it as least restrictive and challenging as possible. However, there still are some things that we absolutely need to have to be able to have people eligible for this. So for ERA, Emergency Rental Assistance 1, this first tranche of money, just quickly, what that criteria is that someone has experienced a reduction in household income because of either due directly or indirectly to COVID, and that the person demonstrates a risk of experiencing homelessness or housing instability. That's rather broad, housing instability, has a gross income of 80% or below, and then eligible households must have a rent of 150% of fair market rate. This funding here it's potentially possible for a resident to receive 9 months prospective, in the rears, 3 months prospective, and then another potential 3 months prospective for a total of 15 months of assistance if they qualify, and the qualifications are above. So, however, we want people to call us because there are times when they may not meet these criteria, but there could be other funding sources that could support them. This first 34 million is ERA 1. Then the next approximately 31 million is called ERA 2. And the eligibility criteria for that is different, and it may allow more people to get supported. So that is very good news. And that will be implemented later this fall. Next slide, please. Great. I also want to note that there has been, of course, most of you have heard about the CDC eviction moratorium that took place, and that has since ended. But the state, on August 26th, the state took action and passed by the General Assembly and signed by the governor in August, that effective August 10th through June 30, 22, that a landlord cannot evict a tenant for non-payment of rent if the tenant meets specific criteria. It's very, very important to note, though, that that landlords can evict residents for things other than non-payment of rent. Okay. It's listed here what those criteria are. And as a requirement of this, this legislation, landlords and tenants are required to apply to the Virginia Rent Relief Program or the locally administered program. In Fairfax County, we opted not to go with the Virginia Rent Relief Program. We are locally administering it. And that is through the examples I just described, calling coordinated services planning or the landlord portal. Next. And then this is just a visual for us to get to our next conversation, which is the strategies to continuously improve upon preventing eviction in the county is threefold. CSP needs to continue to make sure that our processes are efficient, that they're helpful for each resident, and that we take feedback from others and adapt our process. So that is one lane of this. The next is that we want to, and we are going to work with community providers to support landlords with awareness of what's available, but also to help with completing application and completing the application rates of what we're having. So we initially were just telling people about the services, and now we're needing to go deeper and really work with what are the barriers for people that have these cases in pending status. One of those is through the landlord, and the next, which is the bottom one, is work with community providers to support residents with, of course, the awareness of what is out there in terms of assistance, but also what are the barriers for completing the CSP rental request documentation. And all of that, of course, is to prevent evictions. Oh, sorry, John, go ahead. Okay, I've spoken to most of these things, but what we have found, and this is as I'm wrapping up, effective outreach strategies, of course, are working with trusted community-based organizations and houses of worship with you all. We want to continue to do that. There are and needs to be even more multilingual media and public information campaigns about it. There are promotion materials out there, but we're recognizing that it's not just about the initial outreach of people, it's about working with them individually and in the community at a broader sense to be able to say, how can we work through whatever challenges we're having with submitting the required documentation. And then we need to, like I said here, continuously adapt methods to remove barriers for landlords. And I'm going to get into in a second, my last slide, something called a companion program and landlord tenant outreach. And the expansion of community access points are ways that if a resident needs to physically bring anything in, which we do not need them to, people can now take pictures of their documents, they can be scanned. But if they need to be scanned and they're not able to somehow get them to us through email, we're expanding community provider locations where people can bring in their paperwork and it can be uploaded and scanned and then sent via email. Last slide. Okay, what can houses of worship do to help? So we want to continue to have conversations like these to do some myth busting about what people think is the situation in terms of rental assistance and what is actually the situation. So some common things that come up is people do not believe that they can get multiple months of rent, or if they got support before, that they can't get support now. That is not true. We need to just work on an individual case to make sure that they have not necessarily met their entire maximum eligibility. Maximum length of time. We do not have an amount that's a maximum. We have a number of months that can be a maximum. Some other myths are that people with mortgages can't apply. They absolutely can. We don't use ERA funding for those individuals, but we do have other funding sources. There are multiple funding streams. The other one is that if a resident is concerned about documentation or legal status, that we may be asking about that. We do not ask about that. We do not talk about that. We do, however, talk through some fears that people might have and share with them some strategies and ideas to be able to convey this. What funding this funding has done is has allowed us to do what they call attestations. So a resident can attest that they are not having income right now. We do work with residents that have non-traditional living situations, which we know a number of our families do. And so we do need to connect with some type of lease. However, we are able to talk through what that might look like. And we are willing to work with a significant unique situations in that regard. And then wanted to also have you make sure that you share with people that, you know, there right now, I just checked before this call, there is a 16-minute wait for the Spanish line and a 41-minute wait for the English line. However, there is not a wait necessarily, because almost immediately residents can put the callback assistance and we can call them back. Those numbers in terms of wait means how long it may take during the day for us to get, on average, for us to call you back. Okay, at the end of the day, it's a little bit different of a story, but throughout the regular day, that's the most recent stats. We'd like you all to stay informed on what's happening. So our eviction prevention website has most of the information, has a lot of the information, lots of toolkits, lots of information. There are checklists for residents and landlords about the documentation they may need when calling us. And that we also have the required documentation templates. So for example, as I mentioned, there are attestation forms that people can attest to, you know, if they don't have pay stubs, for example. There's a lot of an ability for us to be able to take a resident's statements about that. So those are all on this website. We hope that you all will continue to support the local community providers like you have been doing. I cannot say more about all of you all and their work with being the front line in terms of the community, responding both through food and emotional support and assistance and all of the above. So please continue to do that, as you know, and then consider working with a contracted community provider about doing resident and landlord engagement. And real quickly, what I wanted to share there is that we've seen some innovative models. There's one in Herndon where a church has developed a companion program for residents. And what that means is they've trained volunteers to work with residents one-on-one to help them with, you know, they can call CSP with them, not on their behalf, but with them. They help them get their paperwork together. They've helped them, you know, walk that process. And so that's an idea that's kind of taking some momentum. And then we also could use volunteers to support community-based organizations with assisting apartment complexes to complete program applications. I don't want anyone to kind of run off and do that just yet. There's more information to follow on how you could help community providers in this regard, because not all community providers are doing this work. And so please know I will circle back with VIC and share kind of who to contact and what the process could be if you're interested in helping this way. And then lastly, please continue to collectively communicate with county staff on trends, needs, and solutions. And that's most important, solutions. So how can we know what you're seeing and then work together to solve it? And if you have individual cases that are of note that haven't received their rental assistance or have questions, then I will also provide you after this a set of questions that you can ask to be able to get to some resolution to it, and then who to call if these other steps didn't, you know, have been satisfied and you still have questions. So I'm going to stop there. Brenda, I hope I didn't take too much time, but I am available and open for any questions that you all might have.
You're muted, Brenda.
Got it. Thank you, Sarah. Lots of information that you've provided. I want to open this up. If there are questions, you could either raise your hands or put it in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Sarah, so much for all the information that you provided. I think a few things that you mentioned were new to me, and I am happy to be here so I can pass to my team and pass this information around. The callback, I think that is fantastic that CSP was able to implement, because it was going to save tons of time. And I think we'll encourage people to call because they know that I am going to say 6 months ago, a little more before even, people knew that they were going to stay maybe for an hour on the phone trying to get in touch with somebody. So that is a huge, huge improvement. And the other thing is, I'm glad to hear that that the provision that you have in the past, that CSP has in the past, that you receive only one-time assistance, is now flexible. And again, it's going to depend on the situation of the client. We, when we talk with the clients, even during class or coaching sessions, we really encourage them to say, okay, call CSP, your situation may be changed. If you receive assistance in the past, give them a call anyway. We know that there is money available, more if the situation continue on. So that's great. I wanted to ask you, do you know how long it takes for a case manager basically to resolve the rent assistance process? So once they start until they have the money, they send the payment and everything, how to have an idea to say to the clients?
Sure. Great question, Maria Jose. So unfortunately, that's all dependent on the information that we need. Okay, so when residents call us, majority of the time they're going to speak with someone that day. But say it's at the end of the day and we need to speak to them the next day, that's of note. But so the conversation with if they're first time caller, if the conversation should take about half an hour. When they leave that conversation, though, they will be told what all they need to be able to provide to process their application or their request. What we're finding, and that's why we're trying to do these other kinds of creative things, is that the time between our initial call with someone and us having all the documentation is taking a long time. So there has to be, and we all know that, right? It's hard for all of us to turn in stuff as well. And there's just a lot of challenges. But we've also tried to make it as simple as possible, but even making it as simple as possible and as bare bones as possible, that's still taking truly up to the client and up to the landlord about how long that's taking. However, once we receive all the information, we do have a quality assurance process to make sure we're following all the federal guidelines. And that is not taking very long at all. That should be a couple of weeks. And when I say not very long, I know for a resident that is afraid and scared, that raises their anxiety. But we are also producing a document for residents for them to know their status, right? So if the landlord comes or if they are involved with court, we do have documentation to say where they are, that they have applied and that where they are in the process. So once we receive all of the information, it is taking us a couple weeks to, again, validate all of that and to ensure that we've followed all the guidelines and then make the referral to the community provider. And then the community providers very quickly turning around and sending the check to the landlord. So I've actually been asked to do some statistical analysis around what the time frame is. And who's kind of responsible for what. So that should be coming out soon. And I can share that through Latishma or through Katina to be able to share that with you all. But it's dependent on, in part, the resident and how we can help them get the information to us quickly.
Thank you. Yes, we know that part is complicated more. And if you need to have the landlord involved in some point, yes, it's going to depend on when they receive the information. Yeah, thank you.
We also have a question in the chat from Cameron Wiles. He says, at the current rate of outgoing payments and new clients, how much longer do you anticipate funds being available before they are depleted? And what percentage of applicants have been qualifying for funding services?
Great question. So we have a couple years to spend the money, but at the rate we are going, remember we received about $70 million. We're spending about between 1 million and 1.1 million a week. So we are, if we play that out, we have a fair amount of time to be able to work through this funding. Now, what's important is that the federal government also could come out with other funding sources. So I also know that although we received $70 million from the federal government, that they also could be reissuing other funding to be able to help with rental assistance. As you can tell, they've been watching things in the market to see how that's going. And then in terms of, so we have significant funding for definitely the remainder of the year. And we're watching it very closely. We put out a report every 2 weeks to the Board of Supervisors. I will send you all that link if you'd like to see it. It's a Health and Human Services update on our spending rates, our any updates on Health and Human Services. It's on the web. I can send you that so you could kind of see call volume, length of time to respond to calls, as well as spending patterns. And then in terms of what percentage of applicants have been qualifying for funding services. Because we have multiple funding streams, most people are applying. Most people are successful in receiving it and qualifying. Again, 80% of AMI is about $80,000. I don't have it off the top of my head, so that's significant. And then if someone was to be above that, we also have other funding sources. And if all else kind of happens, we can go to private funding sources like community providers. So most people have been able to qualify. Let me know if you have a specific population or anything else that you'd like to let me elaborate on, and I'd be glad to.
Okay. One more question in the chat, and this is from Karen from Groveton. We have a food pantry at our church. Is there written information available which we can share with folks who express housing concerns?
Yes. Hi, Karen. Wonderful. So we have flyers and checklists and things that you could print out, or we could bring copies to you if you'd like, to be able to put perhaps in food bags or when you're meeting one-on-one with people. So be glad to drop off. We have plenty of information in different languages too. So I will include those links in the chat as soon as we're done. And please email me, sarah.allen@fairfaxcounty.gov, and we can also arrange to bring anybody flyers if you'd like to be able to include in your services.
Are there any other questions? Anyone else?
Anne's hand is raised.
Ann? You're muted.
I was wondering how many applicants you have actually had, and you said you're spending money at a certain rate, and I didn't hear what you said.
Sure. So we are spending approximately $1 million a week rental assistance. In terms of the total amount of residents that we have supported since the pandemic, that is, let me just pull that up. I believe it's about 18,000 families or individuals, I should say, households, excuse me. And then, I'm sorry, what was your second question? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, say again what you just said, the number of households that you've supported.
It's approximately 18,000 that we've supported. Let me just get that number for you right away. So it's approximately 18,000 since the pandemic that have been supported through rental assistance. And Anne, did I answer all your questions?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
One more question, Sarah. I wanted to know if you come up with a procedure for people who multiple families who are renting the same house, and how to help those who maybe don't have, I don't know, a lease for the room or I don't know, the floor. Do you have
Yes.
something where you come up with? Yes, please.
Yep. So we are constantly working on the definition of a household, because it's a household, and we know the answer to it, just to throw it out to the group. You know, there's actually the structure of the house, but we know there are multiple households within each, within a house, that we need to consider separately. Because if I don't know you and I share a house with you, we shouldn't use your income to be able to assess my income, right? So we're doing that. What happens when someone is subleasing, right? Or subleasing from the leasee is we do want to talk, and we recognize that sometimes people are not aware of what's happening in the rental property, but we do need to talk to people because we don't want to put anyone at risk of potentially being evicted. So what we've done in some situations is if a resident is working with the leaseholder. So Maria Jose, you have the lease, I'm renting from you. What we ask is that we actually talk to you because you're the leaseholder. And then that is a way to work it through. If there's a lot that goes into that though, right? And we really try to work through how to get this situation, but we do need to make sure that we're paying the correct person and we're paying the landlord and that it can be validated. And so there are agreements that are very informal, and we ask people, including perhaps writing a agreement amongst each other. So you and I are writing an agreement, but I see that you're the leaseholder. So we're really trying to work through all of that and not create more fear, but also, comply with guidelines that is necessary, that we need to see the documented amount of rent, of course, and not have people duplicate. Everybody asking for rent, stuff. Landlords not doing that. So we're working through all.
And that is something that the social worker from CSP will be able to guide the client and explain what is going to be the process, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
However, if you hear a situation where it is not explained well enough, or perhaps it's not working the way it should be, I would call Amy Garcia or Keisha Dotson, of course, and I will put their name in the chat.
Thank you so much for the clarification. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Sarah, before we just open it up for other members of the VIC community to share what things they have been doing in your churches and houses of worship, I did have one question, and that was, I know for many of the persons in my community, in my houses of worship, they are seen by maybe a deacon or an elder in the church, and they may say, we want assistance, but not knowing what to expect, have a tendency not to want to go through the process. Is there any way that you can share with us what type of information is requested so that maybe we can help persons not feel so frightened about applying?
Sure. So the 4 things that are required are a county resident, the area median income piece, they have to qualify for that. And we would find that out by, do they have pay stubs, right? Or can they attest for how much they make? We would need their rental total, Brenda, and then we would also, so those are the 3 main things. But what's really important is that your colleagues could call with them. So people can call with us, and we just ask that you identify yourself, right? So if you wanted to call with one of your parishioners and say, hi, I'm Brenda, I'm calling with Joe Smith, but Joe Smith is going to do the assessment, that might help too, to really ease some of their fears, but also then to help with follow-up about what things we may have said, perhaps quickly, or I hope we don't use jargon, but we could. And so how do you all help with that? So that's another way. Some of the checklists that we have, Brenda, also gets people ready before they call us. So I think that would be helpful as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anne?
I was just wondering, that you had that chart with ways that community providers and faith communities can help. Is there any way you could give that to the VIC? Christina sends things out and in addition to her regular job. So maybe you could send that out to all members of VIC, and that would be very helpful to be able to refer to specific things where we can be helpful.
Sure, Ann, be glad to.
And Sarah, I put in the chat the tenant checklist for English and Spanish.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katina. That's great. And I see you put Amy's information in there also. So
Yeah, Letitia put, and Keisha's.
Oh, Letitia did.
Mhm.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And then Brenda, I'd see one more question if you'd like me to answer that from Cameron.
Sure. Yes.
If a person or family self-evicts without knowing the resources available to them, are any of these funds available to be used to get help to help them get back into housing, or would they need to go through a different funding source? Great. So if a resident was to be in Fairfax County housing and leave their obligation and go to, say, Prince William, first and foremost, because they lived in Fairfax County, they can work with us to be able to see if we can help rectify that situation. If they go to Prince William, then of course, Prince William, Prince William is working with the state and they would receive rental assistance from them. If a resident is staying, say, with friends, and they still continue to be in Fairfax County and want to lease up in Fairfax County, these funds are available to help with security deposits. And if they qualify, get some prospective rent going. So it all just depends on if they stay in the county or if they leave. But the most important thing is we really want people to clear up their rental obligations if we can, so they don't fall, because we'll just see another challenge, a couple of years from now when people aren't able to rent on their own. So I hope that answers Cameron, but there's options on each. Great.
Any other comments or questions for Sarah, or anyone want to share the gaps your house of worship may have feel during the pandemic? Okay, if not, Sarah, thank you so much. You've been really a great help. Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that in the Baha'i community, we had a couple people who lost their job. They became ill and lost their job, and working in service industry, lost their jobs. And then the places that they worked for went out of business. And so fortunately, there are people who understand navigating things like the rental assistance, and so we put them onto those things so that they could, and the one that I know most closely, her assistance finished, but I've just informed her she should go back and look at the eviction prevention site because she could get other aid. And so this is one of the things we're trying to do in the Baha'i communities, keep people informed if we know that they're in a situation that's difficult. We have also had the community provide assistance to these people on occasion when they were stuck, and also individuals have stepped in to give assistance. But I think we want to make sure that they're receiving what is due to them through this process. That's one. The other thing that I think hasn't been mentioned today is that we've been doing a lot of educating of our members about vaccinations, and making sure that they understand that the vaccine is safe, effective, and that in the Baha'i faith there is no religious exemption for getting vaccinated. There's no way you can claim that the Baha'i faith says I shouldn't be vaccinated. So we've made very clear to people, unless you have one of the medical requirements for not getting vaccinated, then we not only care for the wider society and protecting others and ourselves, but also we believe that science and religion go hand in hand, and that science has shown that vaccines are effective. So, you know, a lot of these are educational
Mhm.
aspects.
That's right. Bill, I just wanted to comment that that's a wonderful perspective and a response that all of the houses of worship have done for years. And to your point, and you know, that the resources are here and they're available. And that's what we'd love to work through first, right? Because when they stop, or if they stop, then we might be more reliant on generous community members to be able to support them. So let's use this thing, let's use this resource and this stuff, but it is important for us to get feedback on what may not be working so that people can get it quickly and so forth. And I apologize, I forgot to mention, and because I see Mrs. Corbett Sanders on here, that we have been working with the school social workers and the school parent liaisons, and will continuously do so to make sure they know and they're an access point to be able to make sure residents know about rental assistance, and we're keeping housing stability in the community as well. So just wanted to make sure I added that.
If you would like to send me information, I'll add it to my newsletter, because people that may not be on the government list or the county list have kids in schools and may get it through me.
Be glad to. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And if you have it in multiple languages, that's great too.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other persons want to share what your congregation has been involved in during this pandemic?
I wanted to mention that at the Financial Empowerment Center, since the pandemic started more heavily, I was going to say in the first 6 months in last year, we were providing workshops where we were offering clients information about what are the resources available in the community, where they need to go, where they need to apply, how to apply for unemployment, where are the food. And then later, when we start having the site for testing, we even support the same initiative, letting know the clients in our area where exactly were the places where they can actually go for the testing. We found that communication and education was key during the whole process, because the way that CSP worked before the pandemic was one, and after the pandemic, during the pandemic was another one. So people were not calling in some point to CSP because they knew that they received assistance a year ago, and now it's not even a year. So they were not very confident that they were going to receive assistance. And again, there was so many unknowns, and the way that we tried to close the gap was providing information. Again, we did a few, maybe 2 per month, workshops about COVID resources, and that really helps to, again, pass around information, me trying to make the process a little simple, because everybody was struggling. But it was great to see how the county rapidly was trying to, again, serve the community, find the places. I think we have a client that in November, in some point when we were talking, she said she was not aware that South County was doing food distribution once a month. And we say, you live 2 blocks from the office. But she was not aware about that. And again, that type of assistance and resources, I think they were key to help the community.
Thank you. Thank you. Bethlehem has served with food distribution since the pandemic started. We're continuing to do food distribution, and we've also served as a vaccine clinic, and will continue to serve as a clinic for the booster, and also have been doing the flu shots and some of the others. So we will continue to do that.
I just wanted to jump in Rising Hope has been keeping up with our friends along the Route 1 corridor, specifically through our food pantry that we run Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then our God's Bounty and TFAP that we have on the third and fourth Fridays. During the height of the pandemic, we were also not only keeping up with our normal distribution of hot meals that we have Tuesday through Friday, we increased that from about 200 or so that we were doing pre-pandemic to, at the height of the pandemic in the summer of last year, we were doing about 1,500 meals a week. And as well as continuing to provide for our homeless community through our homeless closet and things along those lines. One of the greatest things that I've seen in my tenure here as the lead pastor at Rising Hope has been the efforts that we've had with our community partners, bringing people over to Bethlehem Baptist for vaccinations and all of these other pieces. I also just wanted to say, Sarah, that recently, probably within the last 2 weeks, we've had a member here at Rising Hope that's really kind of fallen on some hard times and wasn't necessarily certain where to go, and found out just probably within the last 2 weeks that she had qualified for one of your programs and received all back rent, and also received, I believe it's almost the full 15 months of the services. So it is to say that I know that you all are out there and you're doing good things to help the community. And if we can be of assistance and partnership in that way, we are happy to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, I think our time has been well spent. Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you for closing and final remarks. Thank you, Sarah. This has been wonderful. Thank you for all the information you shared. And we hope we continue to have a great partnership.
Thank you, Brenda and Sarah, and John, who managed the visuals there. Wonderful. And thanks everybody for coming. Sarah, what I think you can do is send the slides. If you send the slides to Brenda and me, I create an email that goes for Christina to send out that includes the link to the video and everything else. We'll just include the slides with it so that it can all go at once. So I think I put somewhere in the chat, I don't know if you saw it, my email. So mountvernon.bahainfo@gmail.com is in there.
Perfect.
Okay. Or if you know, and if it bounces back to you, I will just send you a note to remind you. Okay. So thank you so much. This has been very informative, and I think also is helpful on one of the big issues, which is the trying to prevent a large-scale eviction that could cause tremendous difficulty and have many repercussions in the area, not least of which would be people without homes. And we don't want to contribute to homelessness in the process of dealing with economic issues. It's just, it just makes more problems that have to be solved. So everything that we can do to keep the landlords paid and the people in the apartments is great. So thank you all, and wish you all the best. God bless, and we'll see you all soon. Oh, next month is I have to get a date up here. Sorry about that. November 3rd will be the next VIC general meeting at 11:30, and it will be Rodney Lusk and Chief Davis talking about public safety and policing. And I welcome in advance questions that any of you want asked, because I want to really give them questions in advance that they can look at, preparing their remarks around. And then also Rodney Lusk is going to be talking about the new community center down in the Audubon neighborhood and the workforce development center that he's going to be included with that. And so any questions about either of those topics will be really good. And if you haven't read it, there is the University of Texas report on use of force and policing in Fairfax County, which is worth reading. It may give you some ideas for questions. All right, so see you next month, if not before. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.